Hello and welcome to Connect This. I'm struggling with foggy brain, which most of you will probably think is just normal Chris. But I'm back. Had a great time on vacation. Checked out the eclipse in Cleveland. Doug, our special guest today, got to see it over Arkansas. I don't know if anyone else saw it anywhere cool. But all of the pollen in the world was then dropped on my route, I think, and it has been killing me ever since. So I've been trying not to clear my throat into the mic too much, but it's going to be a fun episode for that. We're going to talk about middle mile. We're going to talk about why we're not talking about net neutrality. We're going to talk about a little bit about the ACP transition coming up. We're going to talk about a little bit more about bulk billing likely, but mostly we're going to talk about middle mile now, perhaps the recent past, and in the far, far future, thanks to some thinking Doug Dawson's been doing. So with that, Doug Dawson, welcome to the show.
Hey, welcome back from the eclipse. So I can see that the eclipse splits your hair very nicely. So.
I thought of you because, and I don't know how you'll react to this because it's not the Grateful Dead, but we saw it in Cleveland at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We were just outside there. They set up speakers around downtown near it, so you could enjoy their programming even if you weren't inside of the area. And they're playing Dark Side of the Moon and a bunch of other stuff. And when the sun broke through again after Totality, they started playing Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles. So pretty awesome atmosphere.
And quick question, who do you think my second favorite person in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is?
Janis Joplin.
Patti Smith. I'm a massive Patti Smith fan. All right, onward.
So we got, I didn't say hi. I'm Chris Mitchell with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Travis, welcome.
Good day, Mr. Mitchell. We did not have the eclipse here in Minnesota. It was dreary and overcast like normal, but that is... I don't have anything witty today other than, I hope we get into some good conversations about 6 gigahertz and the FCC. That's usually good.
And your favorite FCC commissioner. And your favorite, who is it?
Mr. Ajit Pai. My man.
And I'll just come back and say, name a third.
Rosen Whistle or something.
Okay, that's two. Those two I was going to give you. Now, who's the third?
Tom Wheeler. I learned that one that time. Yeah.
It was quick, too. Now I just look like a jerk.
No. I have my Chris Mitchell notes here, right? So, yeah.
Kim McKinley from UTOPIA Fiber coming to us from South Kakalaki.
South Kakalaki. That is where I am today. I was in D.C. this morning and ended up in South Carolina on my way to Little Rock next week. So just doing a little tour of the country here. There was an eclipse, though. I mean, somebody said there was an eclipse. I didn't even know.
Yeah.
Thanks for the news alert. And Chris, okay, what event do you not travel for that's like this? I mean, I think that you travel for everything.
I traveled for the last one. Jackson was like 1.5 years old and it was super cloudy. And on the way home, what's supposed to be a 6-hour drive turned into a 12-hour drive thanks to road construction in Iowa and the entire state of Minnesota trying to use the Iowa interstates to get home. And it was awful and miserable and one of the worst road trips I've ever been on. And that actually says a lot. So I was really glad that this one worked out. And now I'm going to start traveling more for these things, I guess.
Fair enough. Okay. I'm like Doug. Moving on.
Doug Mathelin. Oh, well, there you go. Just butchered it. I was all ready for it.
We cover this. It's McLovin. McLaughlin. So close enough.
McLaughlin. We have been we've been asked to do a adult version of this, and I think McLovin would be a great guest to have on that version of it.
I think I'm creating a moniker for myself here that I'll never be able to get rid of.
So Diamond State Networks, which we talked about a couple of years ago, because awesome organization that was formed with a lot of electric cooperatives that are making really important investments in the state of Arkansas. Arkansas rocketing from toward the back of the pack toward the front of the pack for internet access in rural areas in particular. And you've been involved with that with Diamond State Networks.
That's right. Yeah, 4 years running. But hey, what a pleasure it is to be the second most well-known and well-liked Doug on this podcast.
I just want you to let you know, with our monstrous fan base, you have definitely got your new moniker. So,
That's right.
So we are going to launch in with. I just wanted to note that I did want to leave a space for a minute or two if anyone wanted to say anything about net neutrality, but I don't want to get into it today, and we'll figure out how we want to cover it in the future. But I don't want it to take over things because I just don't think it impacts the industry nearly as much. Because no matter what happens, I think we're going to be in this sort of like standstill for a while. So. Does anyone want to say anything about net neutrality? It's going to be voted on in another 2 weeks, I guess.
So what you just basically said is we're going to talk about net neutrality, but we don't want to talk about net neutrality. But does anybody have comments about net neutrality?
No, I guess what I'm responding to is this. If you read an article about telecommunications over the next 2 or 3 weeks, the chances of it not having net neutrality are approaching zero. That's all anyone cares about in telecom in the very near future. And I don't want to fall into that trap.
Okay, fair enough. I have nothing to say then, sir.
I mean, it's one of those things that Travis and I have talked about it, and we don't find it very interesting. Like, it just comes down to the big companies.
I didn't even know they were doing anything until you just mentioned it. What's up?
It actually comes down to the willingness of the FCC to actually enforce anything, and they're not going to. So, yeah, it's not going to mean much. So,
I mean, I think it will have impacts on certain things. For instance, Lifeline, and whether you have to be a have an ETC in order to get Lifeline funds. One could imagine that process might be easier to change with the net neutrality rules that'll be going in. But there's a lot of things that'll just be more heat than light about whether this will change industry investment. It won't. Whether it will cause the sky to fall, it won't. Like, whether prices will go up or down, they won't. The net neutrality, I think, is worth talking about to some extent. I won't say it's not worth it, but it's mostly gonna be a lot of hype and not a lot of substance over the next few weeks as it comes out again.
well, that was 4 minutes of not talking about it. Excellent.
Well, there's a show that I really like called Advisory Opinions podcast, and they have a not worth your time segment. They put it at the end. I like to put it at the front. I don't know why. Maybe it's not a great idea.
So we lose any viewers we might have at the beginning instead at the end of the podcast. Okay.
It's hard for me to believe that someone would tune in and see you on the screen, Kim, and not want to just hang out with that new haircut that you're rocking.
Oh yeah. I would like to let you know that when I was just in DC, I got more comments on the press release regarding this haircut than I would ever like to admit. Thank you, Mr. Bob Knight, for releasing that to the public. But thank you.
Okay, the other thing we wanted to touch on before diving into Middle Mile is the end of ACP. There's a couple of things. Like, I'd been wondering what happened to that New York case where New York was trying to mandate $15 a month service, and I guess it's in Court of Appeals for the second district, which is I think the federal courts found that New York didn't have the power to do that. I think the state appealed. It's been sitting there, and I think the courts are waiting to see what happens with some other court cases that are in front of the Supreme Court this year. And so I don't think we know really what level states have, what power states have to mandate a low price as the ACP goes away. So that's going to be interesting to track, although I think most of us think the states will not have a significant power to require a low price. And then I've also seen that there's already starting to be a lot of frustration on the National Digital Inclusion Alliance email list about problems with trying to get people onto Comcast Internet Essentials. There's all these different rules, and apparently every CSR for Comcast has a different thought about how one qualifies to be in Internet Essentials if you've been taking a normal package and applying the ACP credit to it. So, Doug, I'm guessing you're tracking this fairly closely too.
I am, and I've been talking to and researching. There's a surprising number of ISPs of Travis's size and smaller cable companies that are going to respect it for a while, 2, 3, 4 months. They're all going to end it by the end of summer. But there's a lot of people who are going to take a chance the FCC brings something back. But so they are giving customers a sort of a break. Comcast situation is typical Comcast because folks get paid a commission based on sales and they don't want to give customers discount. It's an anti-incentive to sign people up for a discount.
So they can play dumb on the phone then. Kim, were you going to say something?
I was going to say to you, I was going to ask your opinion, Chris, of what do you think is going to happen and why, because I personally, but I'll go with my opinion first, shocking enough, I just don't think that these states are ever going to get through of creating a low-cost option. I don't think it's going to get through the courts. I think it's going to show to mandate that companies have to offer this. I don't think it personally, I don't think it's fair for smaller telecom companies to have to require to offer a low cost option. What about economics? What about how do we make it work? What if it doesn't work for these guys? Do they go out of business trying to provide a low cost option?
I'm curious, and Rye reads some of the same market research that I do. And so, Rye, if you want to jump in, if you saw this more clearly than I did, I was just reading last night and I was a little bit fuzzy. But I thought I saw something about NTIA perhaps accepting $65 and $75 a month packages as qualifying as low costs. In order to allow and like the BEAD process to move forward, because there's a whole issue now with like if you have to offer an affordable plan, what does that qualify as? Because it's a whole nother hurdle for people to jump through. Rye just wrote to me and said I'm on my own.
We think you just invented that entire conversation, but that's okay.
But I mean, like this is it's one of those. The BEAD hung on the idea that an ACP would be helping ISPs to meet their obligations. Now, without that, NTI has to figure out how to deal with that. There's so many different problems associated with this, Kim. I think it's going to be a mess, and I think it's one of those things that, like, I don't know if I said it before on this show this bluntly, but like, I think no one in DC really cares that much what happens. Like the Democrats care more, but fundamentally, the people who will be harmed by this don't really vote in significant numbers. They certainly don't contribute to political campaigns and the kind of that would make it a priority. And so there's a little bit of a cynical reaction I have to it, which is that they're going to be ground up in the gears of the Comcast and Charter monopolies. And then perhaps next year, if there's a if Biden is reelected, at that point, we'll have a new FCC, and that FCC will actually care about reforming the Universal Service Fund. And that is where there would be a long-term solution.
So I heard this today, and I don't know if it's true, that some states are requiring connection fees, like $1 here, $1 there for connections or disconnections, whatever, and that they're going to compile that to create their own like ACP fund. It
doesn't add up. I mean, there's not enough money there.
Those states have a state USF fund of their own, and that money generally already goes to the small independent telephone companies and the cooperatives. So they're not going to redirect it to them. And it doesn't add up. And it doesn't add up to the $7 or $30 a customer. It just doesn't. So
yeah, I mean, I think Illinois,
the FCC estimated that if we put it in the federal USF, it would take $7 to $10 additive to every bill in the country to pay for it. And the math is actually solid. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like $1 billion in California, like $100 million in Illinois. It's just not the amount that states can really cover on an ongoing basis to fix a glaring market failure that we don't have competition. And even if we had competition, it's not to say there would be a fight over an affordable, low-cost plan. And no one in DC and very few people in state capitals are spending time thinking about how we can actually reform this in a way that won't break the bank. So, I mean, this is where Travis, I feel like, always assumes I'm some sort of big government person, which, if you know me, is fairly hilarious. But I do think there are some people who are like, well, let's just have the federal government keep writing checks, and I think that's a terrible idea. Like, we've already spent. I mean, one of the examples we use is that the Los Angeles schools have put $100 million just into, my understanding is just into the hotspots, the wireless hotspots that mostly don't work for people to solve the problem. And if we would redirect government spending that is inefficient on this solution into programs that actually had structural change, we would solve it pretty quickly. But the problem is that powerful companies want those inefficient solutions because that's really boosts their profits. So anyway, I don't want to spend. We already spent more time on it than I wanted to. I think we want to come back and hit this when we have a little bit more time to think about it. But also, hey, what's going on with folks? Like, this is a normal time. The chat is kind of quiet. Looking at you, Ruben, among others. I want to know what's going on out there. So let's move into Middle Mile and hope that
maybe they found a life. Maybe somebody found a life on a Friday afternoon and not wanting to hang with us. I mean,
it's a beautiful, beautiful day out here.
Beautiful spring day here.
Yeah. Middle Mile. So I've been talking a lot, but in the past, we have talked about this, and I have at times, Doug, said, this is for McLovin. God, this is just terrible. So sorry, Doug M. But I've said that in my sense is that middle mile could get worked out over time as we have more last mile networks. There will be more of a demand for middle mile, and it will make it less hard to solve that problem. Feel free to start off by laughing, but give me a sense of what your thoughts are about the current state of middle mile and where we need to go to help fix the problem of making sure that there is affordable transit everywhere.
Well, I'll laugh a little bit. Kim, are you with me on that? Maybe middle mile solves itself. No, I think demand creates some interesting opportunities. Certainly, if you look at some states like Arkansas, we look like a patchwork quilt of ILECs, where nobody really has a predominant footprint around the state. You go next door to Mississippi, and that's not really the case. It's dominantly AT&T from top to bottom, and so looking at both of those spreads, ironically, we both have probably the least amount of middle mile access of any two states in the country. You could probably argue, and so Diamond State was really born out of that necessity, and I know that the Mississippi Fiber network that's being put together sort of in the spirit of Diamond State. I think they would probably say the same thing: is that no one else is clearly going to solve this, no matter how much demand there is. So we're going to have to do it ourselves. And so,
can I clarify?
Yeah.
So you're saying that in Arkansas you have a patchwork. There's a lot of smaller networks,
Right.
and so there was never like a dominant one. And whereas in Mississippi, you have a clear dominant provider, and AT&T has fiber throughout the state, but no one can really access it on reasonable terms, is what I would perhaps fill in the gaps. And so they also have to build one. So it sounds like,
Yeah.
No matter what your situation, you probably need more middle mile investment in your state.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And I think, interestingly, electric cooperatives add sort of a different dimension to this, right? First of all, they're nonprofits. They have expansive reach into rural parts of states, Arkansas being no exception to that. And since we're new movers into the space, we're coming in with 100% fiber, right? So our capacity constraints are really sort of a non-factor. We're able to invest on horizons of double-digit years with no real problem. We can get access to capital for much lower than market rates. And so it kind of takes a whole cocktail of that to get to a different place than you've been able to get to on your own. I've got plenty of experience in the for-profit world and VC-owned and publicly owned companies, and you can't get to this comprehensive platform that benefits rural and metropolitan the same without some of those ingredients being a little bit different.
And so one of the things that I'm curious about is, as electric co-ops have been building these networks, how have they been getting access to a major pop or something like that if there is not middle mile? Because that's sort of the quandary that I have, is I keep hearing from people that there's not enough middle mile, and yet we see great last mile networks being built by for-profit family-owned companies, by telephone and electric cooperatives, by WISPs in some cases. Somehow they're kind of making it work. Can you just help us understand what's going on?
Sure. There are ways to make it work. I think every cooperative we've had that started a broadband project has gotten access to some sort of upstream, connectivity. Lots of aging infrastructure in Arkansas. So almost everyone, probably bought their first 10 gig from one provider. And then, before they got to 1,000 customers, they had a week-long outage where the incumbent provider that provided them service didn't really mind them not being, up and running quickly. And so that morphed from, okay, let's try to figure out how to help one another. So, co-ops that touch borders would then, try to establish some wholesale relationships between themselves. But then, capacity and resilience become a problem. But neither one of those really help with the fact that we had co-ops that were paying in the multiple dollars per megabit of service for their access to upstream. So, $10,000 to $20,000 10 gig connections, $30,000 and $40,000 100 gig connections. And our objective is, we want that to be basically a penny a meg is our blended cost for upstream access. So, We're doing a pretty good job of that too. I think we've probably eliminated somewhere around 95% of our cost for upstream connectivity just at this point, and we're not even really a year into offering services yet.
Well, let me throw it open. Doug, I wanted to come to you first because you've been writing about this. Let's save the future for a little bit in the future of this call. But what's your question?
First of all, every state has this problem. There's pockets of every state who are just not close to the backbones. And so, I mean, I was just working with an ISP in Arizona who was looking at $5 a meg. And the answer is you can make it work, but that just kills all your profitability. That all your money goes for that. And so, so the answer is yes, you can make it work, but it's very uncomfortable. And when you're buying from the incumbent, it's doubly uncomfortable because again, they don't really want you to succeed. I mean, you're taking customers from them. So there's almost no states except the little tiny ones that don't have some place in the state that has this problem. And there's other states that are just as bad as Arkansas and Mississippi when you start looking out in the rural areas. And it's going to become very apparent with BEAD because now we're going to actually be building out into these rural areas. The second problem is, and the other Doug mentioned this, a lot of the routes are old and crappy. And so, you can't order 100 meg circuit on a lot of these things because they're not fast enough to do that. The fiber's old. The fiber's getting older. The fiber is very susceptible to somebody knocking it down with a truck running into a pole. And so, the middle mile networks that we do have in rural areas were largely built by the telephone companies and the cable companies, and they're getting old. They built those things in the 80s and 90s, and fiber is very different today. The fiber in the 80s and 90s was very low quality because they didn't know how to build it right. They would pull it and push it and stretch it and bend it. And so when they built it, 10 years later, it started getting these micro cracks in it. The fiber itself was pretty good, but the way
But they haven't fixed it yet, though, Doug, at all?
Well, no, you have to replace it, and they're not.
Yeah, but like they didn't replace it if it was 80s or 90s, and they're looking at replacing it now, or like that's a little insane.
We're talking about CenturyLink, and
I mean, I know.
They have not.
That's right. To compound that, so much consolidation of these networks has happened over that same 30 or 40 years. The record keeping, it's not like it's sustainably electronic from 1988, right? It was on 3x5 note cards that have subsequently been lost in a mop closet somewhere decades ago. And so when you experience trouble with your archaic fiber service, the time to resolution is astronomical.
Right, because they don't even have spare cards to fix it when it goes out. They're going like, does anybody know what brand this is?
Well, I've heard similar things from reports about Zayo, which I assume is still built 20 years ago. I mean, so I mean, it's not just stuff built in the 80s and 90s. We're still seeing that with stuff that was built comparatively recently.
I mean, starting at maybe 2005 or 2010. Construction practices got much better. People build fiber the right way now, so hardly anybody damages it during the construction process. And the fiber is amazingly clearer, so it's going to carry more speeds. So the old ones also just weren't even that good to start with. They couldn't. The old fibers, even when they were brand new, could have not carried 100 megabits or 100, gigabits. And so we have this archaic middle mile fiber that's almost everywhere. And so a whole lot of the country, when you say they have it, they do, but it's one error away from collapsing. So we have to get all that fixed. The NTIA gave $1 billion to fix all the middle mile of the country and gave all the giant money to last mile. Like there should have been 20, 30, $50 million for that. And so they really screwed that. So.
Why do you think that is? Because that's what I was going to mention. Because the middle mile got nothing compared to the last mile. Why? Or was it lobbying? What was the reason behind that middle mile?
Yeah. Because everyone's all the big guys are lobbying for last mile money.
Well, let's talk about how we got here, though, to some extent, right? I mean, what's interesting to me is if you go back to 2009, we're putting $7 billion into broadband, more or less. And the lobbying at that time for most everyone, except for me, I remember being on the other side of this, was that it should be used for middle mile and only for middle mile. And when those programs were evaluated years later, the people who lobbied for it to be only middle mile then attacked the programs as being ineffective because so few homes and businesses had signed up. And I think a lot of people learned from that and said, well, if we're going to spend money, let's make sure we're signing up homes and businesses. And so they overcorrected perhaps away from middle mile.
But those networks, a lot of them will finally be useful when we now build the BEAD. They're like, they're not dead. They're still sitting there operating.
Well, some of them are. I mean, some of them
Yeah.
have been privatized, like, you know, the
Yeah.
3-ring binder out there by Rubin,
Yeah.
you know, and is
Well,
now no longer, but yeah, others like, I mean, some of the ones
well,
that,
the state in West Virginia, they gave it the Frontier. They actually
Yeah.
handed the network to Frontier. So,
okay,
yeah.
Doug, let's give you a chance to, is there anything else you wanted to share? And then I'm going to go to Travis, see if he has any questions.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
I agree with those points. We, assuming I'm the Doug you were talking to.
Yeah, Doug McLaughlin.
We the only flack we really got when we applied for the NTIA middle mile grant was from a local telephone company turned quasi fiber optic provider that felt like the state should not support our application because they had a comprehensive middle mile, which I think was effectively laughed out of the room by ourselves and the broadband office and the governor's office. So we ended up with the state support. Now, we did not win the grant. I mean, obviously it was so far oversubscribed, that was not a terrible surprise, but I agree. You know, $1 billion was never going to go far, and probably, you know, $20 billion wouldn't go as far as they would hope.
Yeah, I mean, we need, I know that from the tribal perspective, there's a need for billions of dollars of investment to bring middle mile to from a meaningful point to a point where tribes will be able to pick it up and use it locally. So there's a massive need there alone just for Indian country. Travis, what are you thinking about?
Just curious, Doug, are you actually building the network, or are you operating on like IRUs from other folks?
So we've got some that we build. Predominant majority we've IRU'd from our member cooperatives. Now, the largest section of our network is provided by the Generation and Transmission Cooperative that serves every electric cooperative in Arkansas. So it's all a multi-conduit buried, you know, 288 in the first conduit network. And then we've got some aerial IRUs and kind of a minimal component of our network that we lease from our members.
Okay, and then you hand off waves or lit service?
Either. We do kind of a range.
And what do you find your ISCs are they trying to get to? Are they trying to get to the internet exchanges predominantly? You know,
normally, there's no internet exchange point in Arkansas, which is a problem we're also looking to solve. So we anchor our network in Dallas, Chicago, and Atlanta.
Okay.
Now we're kind of working on some secondary distribution, Kansas City being kind of a first target for that. But those are really the major points that we're connecting folks with.
Yeah, and I guess operationally is the way I approach it, because I'll tell you what, not all middle mile networks are built the same.
Right.
You know, in order, like if we were an operator, we'd want to come and say, you know, the ones that are built along the railroads, those things are real reliable.
Right.
Are the ones down the interstate. Too bad the government doesn't let other people go there. You know, sometimes these rural runs, they're tough. So if you're setting up shop, make sure you understand where your route is going to go.
Right.
I'll tell you what, the number of cuts that we get on these fiber networks is just amazing.
Is that just because of construction and farmers and stuff out there in the fields?
Predominantly, it's farmers in the spring when they're out, you know, tilling or whatever they do, and then you get a lot of river runoff, you know, and on different river runs and stuff. So I would say the problem is broader than just having one middle mile provider. It would be ideal to have multiple that have multiple different routes, because we're not living in the day anymore where internet's just a nice thing to have. It's a necessity for a lot of these folks.
Well, and it's just not rural. I had a client for years who lived on the route that goes from Philadelphia to Harrisburg. Fairly populated the whole way, but that route was mostly along a two-way highway. And one of those poles got hit by a truck or something literally once a month, and they went down.
Yeah.
For years. They finally rebuilt it to follow the brand new Pennsylvania Turnpike and got off of that road. but that road was a really bad choice. But there was not many roads between Philadelphia and Harrisburg. They didn't.
I was
They
going
didn't
to
have a lot
say
of options.
they
Yeah.
have worse drivers in Pennsylvania than they do in Utah. I was just shocked by that, that they hit the polls
Well,
so
I can tell
often.
you.
See, in
Well, part
Arkansas,
of it is they have the worst roads. The roads.
Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say I grew up on
Pennsylvania
not far from those roads, and they are very
They're
narrow and
bad.
they're built on horse trails. Doug
Yeah.
McLaughlin.
yeah, we in Arkansas, we're worried about dove season. So,
Yes.
you know, a well-placed 12-pack and 12 gauge, and you can have a bad
Dove
fiber outage.
season. What is this thing
Dove.
that you refer?
Birds. Birds.
Well, but what do the birds do? Are they? Are we shooting the birds? Or the birds just sitting?
No.
Did the birds eat
No,
it? What?
No, the people are shooting at everything in sight during their drunkenness.
Anything that we think that is cute and cuddly, we want to kill it. So
Okay.
I mean, at least I have to say, like the doves are small enough that it takes some skill, you know. So it's
Right.
not like a vulture or something. I don't know.
that's right.
Doug McLaughlin, you mentioned you're going to think about that IXP solution. That seems like it is very much bound up in all of this. So what's going on there?
Well, I mean, so clearly there's a need for it, right? We, you know, like I mentioned before, we've only been offering, you know, real services on our real network for about a year, and we've scaled from 0 bandwidth subscribed to we'll be pushing over a terabit probably in the next few months. So I think we're answering a lot of backed up demand. We're not even done building out yet. So I think we're going to be in the multiple terabits of upstream backhaul before you know it. So our ability to attract content providers is going to become pretty high. And that isn't a utility that we, you know, want to keep closed up and just monetize for ourselves. We feel like that's something that we can turn into a service architecture that benefits the whole state and every you know, locally owned ISP in the state. And so the primary targets that we're looking at are you know, a little more metropolitan areas, but also college campuses are big connectivity points that we feel like would benefit, you know, the most from having an internet exchange point. There's obviously some political ties that make that, you know, a good public-private partnership. We've got a statewide regional educational network that I think would benefit tremendously from that as well. The hard part right now is if we're going to fund this with public dollars, how do we, you know, fit that into a large enough BEAD application that the, you know, $5 to $10 million that it would take to operationalize a data center of that nature doesn't make your BEAD application get disqualified because the costs become too prohibitive. So there's some mass application options that we're looking at. You know, Arkansas was one of the states that exhausted every dollar that it got on last mile with no consideration for middle mile. Previous administration, previous broadband office leadership. I think it would all be different if we had the same broadband office leadership now. But you know, you look at Alabama; they've put over $200 million into their middle mile infrastructure, and that's growing. It seems like every time you turn around. But so we're trying to get creative with it. We feel like there's enough demand that it's a model that probably floats even without public dollars. But in order to kind of gift the state something that is open access that can be, you know, publicly used by all, I think it's in the interest of the state to partner with it.
Travis?
I'm still stunned there's no internet exchange there. I'm just Googling how I can set one up. I mean, that would be
Well, I mean, it's not, we wrote about like Montgomery was the first one in Alabama. That was just, I want to say, in 8-9 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
They had the first one in Alabama.
without question, this is the most important thing to do.
Right.
You know, if you can consolidate those bits and start and use those eyeball networks to have content guys come to you, you're going to save everybody a fortune. And
so, Doug, what are the hurdles to that? Finding a good spot and obviously then the money to build the physical location.
You know, there's so many reasons for it. I mean, so Arkansas is the home of a tier 1 player, you know, multi-million subscriber broadband company that's not got the greatest reputation for quality networks. I think a lot of the reasons we've already cited, you know, aging plant and terrible record keeping, you know, very bad outages. They were their history had a very bad track record of data center investments gone wrong. And so I think that probably has prevented Windstream from making more of a move on an internet exchange. To be honest, our competitors that have gotten to some size, Ritter Communications, former company that I worked at many years ago, I think they've been more in the flux of last mile growth and they're VC owned. So I don't think that probably fits their investment strategy necessarily. But anyway, so I think now it's down to us. We've got the scale, we've got the most traffic of any network probably in the state of Arkansas, and so I think that we probably have the best foothold to make that happen.
Are there complex like politics or anything? I'm wondering about like one of the municipal networks, like Clarksville, for instance, which I think is a major university there, right? I don't know Arkansas as well as I should.
Small university there, right?
Okay. So is something like that, or is it you need some place that's like in Little Rock, or what are the considerations?
Yeah, I think our two targets would be either Northwest Arkansas, where the University of Arkansas is, around Fayetteville, Bentonville, or here in Jonesboro, where the Arkansas State University campus is. Ideally, we sort of split some traffic load across two different internet exchange points. I think we're kind of looking at both options right now, to be honest.
Well, do you work with the municipalities though that are building their own networks?
We do. We have sort of announced our presence to lots of the municipalities here. Probably the biggest success story in Arkansas is Conway Corp.
It's one of the older ones too.
Right. Yeah, they've been in it for a long time. So Jason Hansen, their CTO, and I are good friends and have been for years. And we're working on getting our services to them and bringing them in. They're sort of the beacon for how to do municipal networks in Arkansas the right way.
Cool. Kim, what's going on with UTOPIA and Middle Mile? You've had to get up to. I know you have it. Frankly, before you had a whole lot of homes to connect to. I think you had a path down to Vegas and some other places, right?
Yes, we do. But thank you, Chris. We built a lot of it. We use other carriers depending to get to some of these places. But I mean, it's a various sources of how we have our middle mile in Utah. And Doug, I'm getting really offended that you were like, how to do municipally owned in Arkansas the right way. We know that we're the pros over at UTOPIA doing municipal.
I don't know that you speak redneck fluently enough in your life, Kim. So I don't know if I can count on you guys yet or not.
She never heard of dove season. I mean,
that's right.
I actually had to text Travis and go, "What is dove season?"
I told her they shoot the soap. Yeah, so she.
Well, and the chocolate bars.
The chocolate bars, yeah, chocolate bar and soap. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm from the South, and I've heard of squirrel season and like squirrels going through fiber. I've just never heard of dove season. You learn something every show here on Connect.
No, it's not the pretty white ones they let go at the weddings. These are like the brown ones that you wouldn't even know they were there. So.
I didn't even know that. All right, dove season. Here we go.
What we're learning on Connect This today.
I'm glad I could bring some culture to this podcast.
I love it.
So where are the major drains then for you? You head up to Missouri, or where do you go?
Well, so we've got 4 that we've set up in state. So Texarkana, right at the Texas border, Northwest Arkansas, Fayetteville, where the university is. Little Rock, obviously, is a good connectivity point, and then up here, very close to Jonesboro. So we've got kind of 4 places to dump traffic out of the state, and then those pin down usually to multiple tier one hubs: Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas. Like I said, we're working on Kansas City as well.
So let's talk about the future. Doug Dawson, you paint a bleak picture, which I think we've covered a little bit of regarding the aged nature of much of the middle mile that is being used. But what are the problems with the future of middle mile?
Well, the problem is, and he also touched on this, I mean, every year we use more broadband, and so we have to carry more and more and more and more. And if you start trending that out 15 and 20 and 25 years, we're going to be carrying 10 to 15 to 20 times more broadband. And these networks that exist today will first off be 20 years older, and they can't handle it. So when you start looking out, I mean, Zayo just built a nationwide network at 400 gigabit lasers. And so that's sort of the state of the art now. There's a handful of terabit laser routes in the country on the East Coast, but they're not the only one. But so there's other people building between the major cities with 400 gigabit lasers, and those are going to be full in 10 years. So those routes will get completely subscribed, absolutely full. And so we have to keep on investing in those. And interestingly, Zayo built those routes. Their justification for doing them was artificial intelligence. They believe there's going to be so much traffic just from that's why they built those routes to reach AI data centers. But then we take all the stuff we've been talking about, all these secondary routes, of which that's the vast majority of middle mile, are the routes to get to Jonesboro and the routes to get to every other mid-sized town, to get to every county seat. Those are already old. Those are not, even if they upgrade those electronics to 100 gigabit, that's not going to be enough bandwidth in the future. And so we're going to have to essentially, the middle mile routes are going to have to be faster than a terabit. The ones that Zayo is doing today at 400 are going to have to probably be 4 or 5 terabits. And those lasers don't exist, only in the lab. And almost all the existing fiber can't carry that. We almost have to replace every middle mile route in the country in the next 20 years. We should be starting now. I mean, this is not a theoretical. I mean, all the last mile, all the ones that go out to the rural areas are already inadequate, and all the new stuff has to either be completely overbuilt with better, clearer fiber. The fiber you need for a 400 gigabit and the fiber you need for a 4 terabit, very different fiber, way more expensive, extremely high quality. I mean,
Is that
they make it, but we're going to have to get to that, which means even the routes that are being built right now by Zayo are going to be good for 10 years, and they're going to have to be upgraded.
Is that because they just need to use multiple wavelengths and they need like enough space to have plenty of multiple wavelengths?
Yeah, to get the terabit, the technology to do terabit lasers is you got to be crossing a jillion little separate light paths just through one fiber. It's really complicated, and so it takes a really expensive fiber. It's got to have a really different inside sheath than the fiber we build today. So we simply aren't ready for a terabit world yet, and the middle mile route has to go to that. And so we're not at all prepared for this. And what I expect is in about 10 to 15 years, we're going to see somebody asking for a giant, $40, $100 billion federal program to build middle mile. It's got to happen.
I thought this was like the once in a lifetime investment that we're never going to need any more federal dollars after BEAD.
And this is going to cost a lot more than the last mile, because we're going to have 20 years of inflation first. So.
And electricity is going to be too cheap to meter. I mean, we've all seen these grand claims. Yeah. Kim, you had your hand up.
Well, I was going to ask this, is that Doug Dawson, you're making this big proclamation that we have to replace all the middle mile. And I talk to people about broadband every single day. Yes, we know I have a great life, but I'm not hearing people saying this besides you, really. I mean, you're hearing like bits and pieces, but you're not hearing it to this extent of what you're saying. Is that because you feel like you're far outside of the conversation, or do you think that people are just not thinking of it yet?
Well, first off, I am hearing it, but I'm not hearing. I'm the only one looking out 20 years right now. I haven't found anyone looking out 20 years, but I'm hearing it today because little ISPs who have been getting along fine on 10 gigabit connections, that's not enough anymore. And so, and often they can't buy multiple 10 gigs. I mean, the guy who gave them 10 gigs, that's all they can get. And so they're trying to buy 100 gigs. And there's a whole lot of places where you can't buy a 100 gig connection. I mean, there's a whole lot of places where you can't do that. And they only grew to that just because, I mean, just in the last 5 years, the average home and business now uses 300 to 400 times more broadband than 3 to 4 times more broadband than they did just 5 years ago. The actual volumes we're sending to the POPs are gigantic, and they're going to keep on getting bigger.
Yeah.
So,
I would take the contrary to some extent with Doug. I mean, I think I would guess you'd push it out a little bit more. I'm more in the line, and you can laugh at me. I think that we have growth coming from two places, right? One is new people coming online, and the other is everyone using more bandwidth from their home connections or their mobile connections. And I do think that the the growth of people coming on the network is going to be dropping down. And I would expect that at some point, much like electricity demand grows very rapidly, and then at a certain point, it starts to level off, and now it's even negative a lot of times. And I don't think we're going to go negative anytime soon, but I would say that there's a good chance that we won't see broadband growth sustaining the level that it has.
Every network engineer I've worked with in the last 20 years who built a new fiber route underestimated the size they needed.
Okay,
I'm
well,
not kidding you.
that's really
Yeah,
good.
I'm with
I'm
Doug.
not-
No one's ever said, man, this network is way too fast and we built too much fiber, right?
Yeah.
Well, I have seen that in a couple places, but it was loaded up with other issues around municipal broadband where people were like, they overspent and this and that. But no, I think that's a really good point, Doug. Like,
I blame Kim for that, but
the vast
see,
majority of the time, people don't have enough fiber. So yeah, I mean, I don't want
But
to.
you made an interesting point worth talking about, Chris, because
Oops.
it's my opinion.
The first time he's ever done that, Doug. So let's be thankful for that.
I'm a little bit shocked here, but we're always going to find new uses of broadband. We're going to, we are just on the cusp of having, telepresence where we could all be having this meeting by looking at we're in the same studio. We're within years of that being a real technology. We're all these wearables that everyone has, these things are all going to start using data centers and actually have real bandwidth, not the first generation, but the next one. We're always going to keep finding more. We're going to find more.
Yeah, no, I agree. And
25 years, 20 years is a long time.
No, I agree. And actually, I mean, I would argue against myself and say that if we would actually move to thin clients in the home and do a lot more in local and perhaps not even local data centers, we would have a much better security environment. We'd have a better environmental footprint. It would cost us less every year for our devices. And so there's a lot of reasons to move to even more data than we've been using.
Can I just love that you said you're contradicting your own sentence like 2 minutes beforehand, but just say it, Chris.
Yeah. But there are three solutions. One is to make the middle mile better. One is to go to edge computing. And the third is all these access meet points that the other Doug was talking about. We only got we have less than 200 of those things. We need thousands and thousands of these meet points. And so, we can really change. If we don't send as much stuff as far, we really cut down on the need here.
Yeah, Doug, we're deploying an 800 gig network here in Arkansas, which, we committed to that about 3 years ago, got a lot delayed through COVID. So we're really just kind of getting to the meat of it. But even 3 years ago, the thoughts of someone deploying a rural 800 gig network seemed absolutely preposterous, right? And now that the rubber's meeting the road and we're starting to see the bandwidth forecasting the way that it is internally, we already see the end of it. And so we're quite frankly glad that there's some 1.6 terabit optics that are, coming to market now, so that hopefully they'll be affordable by the time we need them.
Well,
but you're carrying those across pretty new fiber networks.
Right.
The older fiber network can't handle either one of those.
Right. Exactly.
So I want to ask Doug McLaughlin. I love Diamond State Networks because it's a creature of the electric co-ops, which are there, have nearly 100-year history of serving communities.
Wait a minute.
And
he just called you a creature. I just want
Also, on my road trip, I've been listening to nothing but Harry Potter with my family. So I'm trying to make that conversion out of that world. There's a real danger, as we've seen. You mentioned the consolidation that we've already seen. EXO, Level 3, so many different companies have now been consolidated, and then there's that you want to extract as much as you can from those networks while delaying investment is something we see if profit is the only concern. And so I would not expect that DSN would be doing that. If you look at something like New Mexico, though, although they do have a number of electric cooperatives, I don't think they're in a place to necessarily do the same thing. I love conceptually what Kentucky did, and I would like to see more states do that sort of an approach where the state would actually build a large open access middle mile. I would not do in any of the way that Kentucky did it. Kentucky seems to have let some politics in the way and worked with a contractor that I would never trust. But the idea of a state or cooperatives, I think that's really important. And I'm just curious if that resonates with you at all, or if you feel like, a full private ownership of something would be as good over the long term as well.
I certainly think it can be. I'm with you. So it shouldn't be a surprise. Some of our best technical resources came from the Open Fiber Kentucky project. And you talk about some spot on, knowledgeable people. They're just fantastic. So they've helped us, get a lot further, a lot faster without stepping, probably in as many potholes as we might have otherwise. We happen to sit in a pretty friendly political environment, especially where electric cooperatives are concerned. We have a central state G&T that provides services to everyone, that also serves as our statewide association, where the lobbying initiatives and things like that happen from, right out of Little Rock. So as far as policy, we've been the beneficiaries of some leeway to get things done. And I think the electric cooperatives in Arkansas have always made good on that bet. And so I think our legislators have a very warm place for empowering us to do our thing. So to the extent that privately owned networks, who really at the end of the day are owned by the citizens that the networks serve, if that's a model that could be rinsed and repeated around the country, I think 5 to 10 years from now, we'd have a very different conversation about the need for broadband publicly.
Yeah, well, that's my position. I'm thrilled to hear it vindicated by one person finally.
Hey, the second most popular Doug on the forecast or the podcast.
Yes. And we have to look at those private providers, because we're talking Zayo, Level 3. They don't have let's spend as much money as we can to get this problem solved. They spend very begrudgingly, only at the last minute, right before the networks collapse. And you can't blame them. They're in business to make money. Level 3, who actually has the biggest of these private networks, has no money at all. They're part of CenturyLink, and they're simply running out of money.
No, and let's be clear about this, right?
There's nobody out here rushing to make these big investments.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's not mismanagement in the sense that that level that's, I mean, I don't want to make too broad of a claim, but to the extent that one of these companies says, we're going to really solve this problem with a far-reaching investment that's going to help America, Wall Street is going to be say, what now?
No, you're not. No, you're not. Right.
And that's the system that we have. And so it's important to know that we might want, privately owned corporations to play important roles in our telecommunications system, but there's other areas where we really want to question, their role as being the primary owner of getting out of town.
Yeah, Chris, that's it. A 4 or 5% rate of return just doesn't work in that model. So you got to change the parameters of the model for it to really sit well.
Yeah. Travis?
Well, and it's the delayed return, because as these networks get full, they'll make a lot of money. They'll be completely full. Zayo will be printing money on those routes when they're full, but they don't like the 5 or 10 years it takes to get there.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yes, Mr. Mitchell?
No, I just figured you have other ideas. So what's going to happen is in 15 minutes, I'm going to pull the plug on this. We're going to go into the green room and you're going to be like, I had a couple other questions. And those are going to be far better than anything I was going to talk about.
I think there's some real validity to what Doug's talking about. I feel like we'll get a little bit more use out of these networks. The problem tends to be optical link budget. And most of our networks have been built with 80 kilometer regions. And so a lot of that they'll have to be an insert in the middle. So if you own land in the middle between two region sites, you're sitting on a gold mine.
But that's the sort of thing that's going to slow this down, right? I mean, that's where earlier Travis and I were talking about eminent domain before the show started, before anyone really joined. And this is where I actually like the idea of eminent domain, because I don't think a person should be able to hold the rest of the network for ransom because they happen to have a parcel of land in the right spot that they want to, retire off of.
Oh, no, but they'll get a nice, everyone has seen the farms driving out in rural America with the big cell tower next to the combine. I mean, they get rent off that thing. So it'll be a good opportunity for somebody. And then the other thing is bringing the content closer to the users. I mean, that's the initiative we've been on for the last 10 years. Is try to minimize the amount of long haul or mid-mile we have to use to get places. But the problem with that is you have to get to an economy of scale to be able to attract the content. This is where the internet exchange is absolutely crucial. You've got to take all those people, consolidate it together so you can get the likes of Google, Amazon, and Microsoft to bring content to you, which Doug, as a middle mile provider, I think that would be one of your key target markets to go after is how do I bring content in? So Kim McKinley would like to open an internet exchange down there and have you bring the content to her. So we've just talked about it on the side. She's ready to ship you switches right now.
Right now. That would be exactly what I'm ready to do. No.
She keeps them right there in the hotel room.
Yeah, hotel rooms are where I keep all the switches and all the gear. But thank you, Travis, for that.
Helping you out,
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for helping me out. Okay, back to you, Chris.
So this is something that we could talk more about in the future, because it's not really the topic for today. But I would like to talk about a future, hypothetical future of thin client computing. And my argument is that we end up all paying a little bit more for subscription services each month, but we pay a lot less in terms of whether that is ourselves dealing with ransomware and the other problems and security issues. And, oh, I actually have a password, but I just lost the password, one password, password keeper thing and all those hassles. And I think people end up better off, but I will candidly admit people would rather pay one time for something rather than every month, even if it would make their lives better on the whole. But I think that'd be a good topic for us to talk more about where the future of computing may be going.
Chris, you do know you have a pseudo thin client right now.
What's that? Your
web browser.
Right. No, I agree. And I think that's, for me, it's a sign of like why this could work. So my use case is, and I'm sorry, everyone, but this is something I love thinking about. I'm a professional photographer. I do high volume photography with Nikon gear. Nikon comes out with a new camera, means I have to buy a new computer. Doesn't matter when they do it. But it ends up, I need more processing power. I'd rather pay Adobe a little bit more per month, do all the processing in the cloud. Whether you are an Apple person like Travis or a sensible person like myself, we all have devices that are unsecurable, and we have to deal with this. And we're going to be dealing with this more and more because people making money off of the ransomware and all the other stuff are doing wonderful. And so we need to move to a paradigm which is securable. And I would argue that having boring, dumb devices in the home and complicated services in clouds managed by security professionals will result in all of us having a better experience and having a better environmental footprint. And
Travis, nope, we just need to say it. Travis, what do we not like? What is not acceptable?
The green dot.
Is a green texter. We do not like green texters. Yeah, so sorry, Chris.
As a Windows user, you are running your 7 virus scanners simultaneously, right? The only way to make sure you're gonna be safe.
No, but my point is, and I'm happy to engage on that. My point is even if everyone had as good of a security, and the iPhone is possibly the best secure device, it's still not good enough, and we're still going to see like different things come through and attacking it over time. So, but let's move on to the last topic, which is we're going to talk briefly about bulk billing. So before that, though, any last points on middle mile? I think it's interesting. I did not realize the extent to which the middle mile problem needs to be rebuilt. I was thinking very much along the lines of there's places in these states that need to be reached who haven't been reached. But both Dougs have really opened my eyes to the nature of the problem. To me, it does seem like something that I feel like states would do well to start resolving some of these issues by recognizing that the state, whether it works with a company that has a reasonable expectation of a rate of return in order to build middle mile across the state, or whether the state were to do it itself and then lease it out on reasonable terms like California is attempting to do. I think states should get more involved with this and help to resolve it. Travis?
Go ahead, Kim.
I was going to say, what do we feel? I'm going to probably open a can of worms here. What do we feel about the DOT systems helping with this middle mile problem within states?
I have a big problem with them in that they are, I don't even know what the right word is, but they are so do things my way and no other way. They're very non-negotiable.
My way or the highway.
My way or the highway. That's in most states. And so they're behind the times. Quite honestly, they put their own networks in, don't let anyone else share them. I mean, they're usually folks who are 20 years behind in technology. So it's kind of a very, they got all the right of way, but they don't have the people. So
I agree with Doug. I mean, the two things I'd like to help on are just better permitting practices that are a little more consistent, and then potentially, better future planning for road expansions and things like that, so we can sustainably put lines in where they don't have to be moved every third year. So,
Doug,
And
how
I just
much
want, and I just want you to know that I'm never ever going to help anyone get a permit on a state road now that they've offered. They go, you're that guy. He can't get this permit.
Doug McLaughlin, I am curious because one of the things that I want to get into in the show that we didn't do today, because I didn't read it all, but I want to come back to, is the NTIA has apparently relaxed a bunch of permitting rules, and I'm wondering, have you looked at that? Is that something? I mean, for me, I have to assume that if you are building, networks, and I know that you do a lot of leasing, but to the extent that you're building, how much of your time is like permitting on stuff that it's already like land that has been more or less totally altered by a road or something like that already?
It's more than you could ever possibly imagine. And you can be building a line that's 3 inches from 10 other lines that have been there for decades, and it could be a multi-year process. And heaven forbid it's in a national park or state park or something like that. I mean, you can just tack on orders of magnitude to your wait time.
All right, last comments. Travis, you did have your hand up before Kim was really enthusiastic about jumping in.
No. I think I also want to make sure that people understand the middle mile isn't necessarily these long stretches of geography either. We had someone who bought a pair of fiber from us today that was only trying to go 4 miles, and there was no other way to get there. And so this access to connectivity is definitely it's a problem everywhere.
Juan is commenting. I think he's like 20 minutes back. And that's just so people know in the chat. It does help to provide a little bit more context because we're usually 15, 20 seconds ahead of people, which is the only time I'm ahead of other people.
Juan is right though. So go ahead, Chris.
I have a deep respect for private property, and I am happy to violate it when it is really important. So I can argue both sides of that as well, just like anything else.
And this is a guy who said he's so capitalistic at the beginning of this show.
No.
Remember that?
Let's be clear. I am very pro-market. It is unclear to me what people mean by capitalism. That takes like an hour just to get into unpacking what exactly that means.
Well, as a CenturyLink shareholder, you should quantify all these statements you make. There's got to be a caveat at the beginning. So
I buy shares in all of the companies I want to see decline, and usually I'm successful.
Not only are you a user of their product, you're also a shareholder. Huh?
So the bulk billing is something that's come up before, and it's going to come up again. I think this is like so important. I think it's something that we're going to be coming back to time and again because it is dealing with the challenge of tens of millions of people who live in apartment buildings. This is where most of the people who are struggling to afford their connections live. This is a major area that needs to be worked on. The FCC, I believe at this point, has passed the new bulk billing rules. Is that right? Or is that coming up in this meeting, Doug?
It's coming up.
Okay. At any rate, we've had some people that have written to us and provided really helpful context. I've read some other things, and I guess, for me, I very, very much view this as the opening salvo. And this does come back to private property, frankly. And here is where I think we are smart to worry about, how eager we are for government to abrogate deals and things like that. And so there's some important questions as to whether or not this will prohibit new deals or would be able to sever existing deals. My understanding is that will be different for states that decide to move forward on this versus the federal solution that we're looking at. And so we don't have enough time to get into all of this, but I just want to know if anyone's thought about this at all differently since we talked about it last. What's happening with bulk billing in your mind, Kim?
I just think it's a bad idea. I think it's a bad idea to ban bulk billing. I think you're getting into business practices again and letting people do what they want to do. I mean, we do at UTOPIA, we do a lot of MDUs with single connections, and we do a lot with bulk billing. But why are we going to tell the property owner what they can do with their property or not? I just think it's an overstepping of power and boundaries.
Well, let me push back. We did that with making sure that they would allow antennas with OCHARD rules, right? I mean, there's all kinds of things that we've now required them to do. We do that constantly on matters of safety and other issues. This gets into whether or not people have access to the single most important tool for economic empowerment and education in the human arsenal. So,
but I think then you can require a speed or capacity on the fiber. I don't think you can force them to say, you need this much. A lot of these MDUs, they just oversubscribe their connection too much, and that's why those residents are getting subpar connectivity. So I think there's another way around it, but I know that this is a very controversial opinion from a consumer point, because if I was a consumer, I would want my own connection, but from a business owner or a property owner, I would find this a violation. But that's my opinion.
I mean, this is where I'm hoping to work with Travis on getting a bulk billing arrangement for a location in the Twin Cities, which will be really beneficial for people that are really struggling with hard times, in like affordable housing. And so that's, for me, that's the big issue.
But play that out, Chris. Like, let's say you can't get a bulk billing agreement. It'd be very difficult financially to bring a high quality service to people. See, so it's like, and I know in the investment community looks very favorably with the show Kim and I were at in Florida. I mean, the investment community is pouring, billions of dollars into bulk opportunities to get these units wired. They wouldn't otherwise. So,
I mean, I'll say this in defense of the FCC. It's kind of like they say about the president. There are no easy decisions that come to it. The easy things are resolved by others. And these hard questions then get punted up.
My take on it is they're solving the problem for the big places, but the vast majority of MDUs are not the big places. And so, I mean, to force these rules on all MDUs is just insane. There's not multiple ISPs clamoring to get into most MDUs anyway. And so nobody wants to come into a place where someone's already got most of the customers. It's just not going to happen. But if the first guy can't build that into the rent, the landlord can't, it's going to just be a disaster for tenants. I see nothing good out of this at all.
So what should happen, Doug? I mean, like, that's the sort of thing that, like, there's a part of me that, as someone who is very critical of the FCC, at the same time, I want to be able to offer, a solution. So what would you be doing, Doug?
This comes down to this idea, and don't get offended, Kim, but the idea is MDUs need to be open access. Like, no, they don't. We need to get three ISPs into every MDU. Well, 3 ISPs don't want to go into them. And so that's what I believe drove this, that there's not enough competition. Kim said what the problem is. The problem ought to be a performance standard.
Yep.
5 years ago, they bought a 1 gig of net connection for the building, which was adequate then. Now everybody's using 5 times more broadband, and it's not adequate anymore. They need to be forced to up their bandwidth. And so I don't know how you do that, but that's the answer. The answer is not that there's not 3 ISPs there. It's that the one ISP. It's that the landlord doesn't want to buy a bigger pipe.
But is it the landlord? I mean, my sense is that in a lot of these places, it's the
ISP doesn't want. Yes,
right.
Whoever's providing it there.
But like, that's where the solution to that is to force competition of some sort of opening for investment. I mean,
but you can't force people to build in there. Doug is right.
No,
like, just because somebody's there doesn't mean that competition, if you open it up, that competition's going to come.
No.
And aren't most of these bulk deals in major metropolitan areas?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, yeah, that's because that's where most people live in.
Well, that's what I mean. So, there's not really a third provider for most of these. And so
I don't know. That's the thing. It seems to me like, Travis, how many ISPs are in the Twin Cities? I would guess that there's more fighting for MDUs than for single family homes.
Well, you want to know the truth? Not if you see the math. MDUs are very difficult to build, very difficult to service. Your uptake is not as great as you would think, because it's a very transient community. And a lot of people tend to also focus on the cheapest deal they can get. So MDUs are not, in a bulk configuration, they're amazing. But in an open access configuration, very difficult to make money in MDUs right now. And if you have to buy your connectivity for that MDU from somebody else, it destroys the financial model.
I mean, to me, it seems like there's just a significant problem. Well, I shouldn't say problem. There are multiple problems in the MDU space. One of them is low income. One of them is where people are locked into a provider like Comcast or something like that, and they want out. And the challenge with most of them is, I think, a landlord that doesn't want to make investments. I mean, Sean just wrote a really great story about programs in Massachusetts and New York State that are looking at trying to fund upgrades to buildings to create more competition. I think more specifically low income access opportunities. And Nevada tried to do that, and I think rejected and ultimately shut the program down due to a lack of interest from landlords who fundamentally don't really care if people are well connected or not.
But see, I think people have this equation backwards. They're looking at the building and going, how do we get more ISPs in the building? The real question you need to ask is, how many ISPs are in the street in front of the building? That's the issue.
And what's the answer?
In most cases, one or two. So you have there is no like competitive utopia.
Well, this is why I spent 17 years focused on cooperatives and municipal networks, because I fundamentally don't think that like a for-profit system is going to result in the kind of market dynamics that are required for the system of regulation we have, which is one of a market that drives a need for more investment and lower prices and innovation.
And I would say this too, Chris, is that just because they're in front of the MDU doesn't mean that they specialize in MDUs.
Exactly.
And that's another like consideration you have to take into account when you're looking at this. That not every provider that's going past there even wants to deal with the complexity, like Travis is saying, in the MDU market.
There are some places, and there's a common thing about trying to work yourself out of a job, whereas other people assume that people that work for a government or nonprofits never want to solve the problem because then they'd have to change jobs. And I would love to solve this problem. I feel like I'm held hostage by this passion and work, and I would love to resolve it and move on to other aspects of my life. So I'm a little disheartened that it sounds like right now that's not happening anytime soon.
Chris, you and I should do a tour of an MDU sometime so you can see just how hard it is to build.
No, we've seen. We've done tours in Baltimore, in particular, with some of the older places and how they're reusing the existing coax in really interesting ways. I think I've talked with you about that before. But I believe you. And not only that, but I feel like you'd have to tour 100 MDUs and you'd see that there's 100 different approaches to this, right?
And that's the problem. Now new construction. I'm all a big fan of the ordinance that requires conduit from the street into the building. I also like the concept of, maybe a carrier or a neutral, Cat 6 deployment that you can use. That would be, but that doesn't exist in.
Well, we could have cities require that. They're going to require structured wiring and things like that, right? I mean, St. Louis Park started going down that path with your favorite IT director of all time, and then abandoned it because I think all the landlords just agreed to it anyway.
Well, exactly. But the problem isn't new construction. It's the last 150 years of, old construction. And then, like Ryan talks about here, there are other technologies. The problem you have is when you're a gigabit fiber provider, you need product synergy. And what I mean by that is the neighbor can't get gigabit symmetrical. And then the building next door, you're getting like one of these like 300 down, 100 up. I mean, it destroys your brand.
Yeah. All right. Well, Doug McLaughlin, thank you for bearing with us as we then transitioned away from your topic of choice.
It's all good. I spent enough time in MDUs, and I've moved on. So.
Is this just the same thing over and over again? Is it the same arguments just every few years we recycle it again?
I think so.
Yeah.
Mostly. No. Yeah. Good arguments. It's a problem that I don't think's ever been solved, and may not anytime soon, right?
Yeah, and the problem is that it comes down to like I want this set of rules in this circumstance and this set of rules in this circumstance, and it's very hard to make a law that way.
No.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Doug Dawson, Doug McLaughlin, Kim McKinley, Travis Carter. It's a wonderful way to come back to work is to see you all and to talk about these subjects.
And let's answer Ruben's question next time if you don't want to do it right now.
How hard is it to retrofit with something like VDSL?
Terrible. We tried it. It's the worst plan ever. Oh yeah, it's just a nightmare.
All right,
Tell us how you really feel, Travis. Tell us how you really feel.
There's two things in MDUs that I'm passionate about. Don't have it be Wi-Fi based, and don't have it be twisted pair or coax based. Pull a new cable.
Yep.
Amen.
Well, I think we're gonna aim for coming back in about 2 weeks again, and I hope that you all have a wonderful time. it's going to be right around the time of the net neutrality discussion. So we'll talk internally about how much we want to devote to that without it taking over everything. Because, it is going to be true that in the vast majority of conversations over the next month are going to be about that, and that is going to have the least impact on broadband over the next several years. As long as California can regulate net neutrality, as long as we have some level of choice in the markets, the real interesting question I think is how Title II changes some things like USF and some other aspects. So, Doug, were you going to say something before I close this out?
I'm just wondering how we got back to it again.
Suck you back in. All right. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Doug McLaughlin, thank you so much. We look forward to bringing you back on. We'll talk about the Diamond State and Middle Mile Networks again.
Anytime, man. Thank you guys for having me. Glad to be here.
Thank you.
Wonderful. It's been another fun episode of Connect This.